Hey, everybody, welcome again to another quick episode of the Lead Volunteers Podcast. My name is Josh Denhart. Super grateful that you're here. We're also going live on Facebook, and so if you may be catching us there. Today's going to be a fun one. Not everybody doesn't really like to talk about transitions, but today we're going to talk about transitions. And I have a very, very, very special guest who is super well equipped to talk about transitions. I'm very grateful to introduce the one and the only Christy. How are you, girl?
I'm so good. Thanks for having me, Josh.
You betcha. Hey, tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and let's get this thing going.
Yeah, my name is Christy, and I'm a kids pastor in Ontario, Canada. I recently started a new position with the Meeting House, which is a
Yes.
church with about 18 parishes across the province. And
Yes.
I get to work with the lead pastors and the Kidmin team, the leaders and volunteers, as we reimagine and regather
Yes.
and just move the church forward with even the littlest members of the body.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is you you were a kids pastor, and
Mhm.
then like now you're a kid pastor to tons of kid pastors. I mean, you're almost kind of the big deal, and it's all good. I can say that. You're kind of a big deal now in the space of that particular denomination and that particular movement. Very fun. And so you're now transitioning from kind of an on the ground in the weeds with people with kids to, well, I mean, you're still going to be with people, but something different. Am I right? So tell us a little bit about that. You're from Canada, which is always fun for
Yeah.
me. So tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about this new role.
Yeah. So I'm still figuring it out. When I'm sitting in meetings, sometimes I'll say, as soon as I know what my job is, I will be sure to answer that question. But really, right now, it means a lot of listening and
Sure.
learning side by side with the leadership team, with the lead pastors, and then also with our Kidmin leaders on Sundays. So I get to travel across the province. I try to visit a different parish every week. And sometimes it's 2 hours away, sometimes it'll be 7 hours away. So there's a bit of travel involved, and I get to just come and support and watch and ask lots of questions. I've been told I ask lots of questions.
But questions are a
And
good thing. That's a great thing.
yeah, well, I have so much to learn. So I transitioned from one denomination to another as
Yes.
well. So I have a lot of learning just with what's natural to the community, what are cultural norms,
Sure.
how does this play out in the family, in the church family. And so I'm learning by listening, watching, and just being present with all my new best friends.
And so the interesting thing is that today we're talking about, as the title suggests, transitioning out of and into a new season. And that is like square right up in your world right now. Am I right?
That's exactly where I am. I'm living in
Yeah.
that space.
Well, just for fun, as we're kind of kicking this off, we usually try to think about it in terms of three big buckets for the listeners, right? Let's define it, let's develop it, and then take it home. Help us. How can we do this? And so, first off, how would you define transition?
Yeah, this has been some brain gym, lots of prayer, lots of thinking, going on prayer walks, thinking about what is this time that I'm in the midst of. And I would define transition as the middle of
Okay.
something. Experientially, that is how I am seeing it in this season. And I'm noticing that it's less the end of something and beginning of something new as it is the space in the middle.
So it is not an end and a start. That's you're in a sense you're redefining transition for me in my world right now in the way that I'm thinking about it. Transition isn't an end and a beginning. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, and that's what I've experienced. And in that redefinition, what I realized was there were a lot of things I wanted to bring with me, and that I learned a lot from Jesus during a previous season. And I anticipate learning a lot in the next season. And I want this space in between what was and where I'm headed to matter to the story. So it feels more like I'm in the middle of a story than trying to
Start a
close
new one.
one book.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to like put this on the shelf and say, well, that's done. So let's start over. Because I think starting over is actually really a lot harder than
Cont-
transitioning.
or continuing.
Right. Yeah.
That's very
And I
interesting.
think, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like in my own life, I have often viewed this as if I were, now this sounds rather morbid, but stick with me. If I were to die right now, then everything leading up has led up to this season of my life. However, if I don't die now, then this is for right now, but this is also for some undetermined, unknown future. Like God doesn't waste anything. This is an ongoing saga. And so the idea to close a book, set it on a shelf is not honest.
Right. And I think because we often experience change and transition
Mhm.
like this,
Mhm.
the ups
Yes.
and downs, we feel like up is good and down is bad sometimes.
Man.
But Eugene Peterson says obedience is a long walk in the same direction. And so you can have all the feelings on that long walk, but that pace of faithfulness and obedience is actually what tells the story. And even if we look at scripture, it isn't a collection of stories. It's one big story
With some
where God,
ups and
yes,
some downs.
exactly. That's right, where God is constantly inviting us to partnership with him. That's the story. God partnering with humanity over
Yeah.
and over and over. It's one story with lots of segments and lots of people. And I
And
get to be a part of that still.
still right now. And the
That's
interesting thing, Christy, is that if we were to zoom in on any one story, even in the Bible, and do a micro zoom in, that particular story or that particular period in biblical history looks rather dark. I mean, let's even go into Jesus Christ being not crucified, but being crucified. That's not a good part to the story.
right.
And in the same way, what I'm hearing from you and I'm learning, I got goosebumps, is that if I were to zoom in right now on my life, I feel challenged. I feel overwhelmed. I feel exhausted. And I can really dive into like this, obsessive state about my own self as opposed to seeing and viewing this from a long haul. That's a good word. Thank you.
Yeah. And I don't think you would want anybody to define your story by a season of exhaustion.
Right?
How very unkind.
And I don't want to be unkind to myself. Amen.
Right. Yeah. And so even when you look at how, the big moments that we seem to zoom in on
Yes.
in scripture, we can easily see that, oh, yes, God initiated that story, or God was the final word in that story.
Yes.
But actually, he was there all through the middle. And some of the most beautiful moments in scripture are transitional. When you think about Esther saying, if I die, I die,
That's a middle point.
it's a transition
It's a
too, where
transition. Yes.
she decides, I am going to speak up. And
Wow.
if you look at Daniel and his friends in the fiery furnace, what did they say? Even if my God does not rescue me,
I'll still be faithful.
I will still worship him alone. That's a middle of the story moment.
Yeah. Yes.
When Jesus decides to get baptized by John the Baptist, and John saying, no, this is weird. And he said, no, trust me on this one.
Huh.
And he gets into the water in the middle
That's
of the
a
story.
that's a transitional moment in the story.
That's right.
Now,
The Holy Spirit shows up. It's a
yeah,
wildly brilliant moment that gave evidence to everybody around Jesus of who he was, that he was not only who he said he is, but who John had been saying would come.
he was the one. Now, you said something in the pre-interview and I want
Mhm.
you to expand on this. This is kind of the heart of our discussion today. Transition is the middle. You've definitely alluded to it. But talk more about that. I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Transition is the middle.
So is this the story about the 3 times I said a terrible sentence?
Sure, you can do that.
Yeah. So there was a fourth time I said a terrible sentence, and it was this spring, actually. And the sentence was, I can't do this. And I had a conversation with Jesus that was painful. It had all the tears, it had all the clenched fists, and all of the confusion on my part. And I said, I can't do this. And he said to me, that was the fourth time I said
Okay.
it. And he said, You've only said that 3 times before. And I thought, I don't ever remember saying that before. I don't say that. That isn't me. I can do lots of things. I don't say I can't do this. I find a way, or I find people, or I reimagine, but I never say I can't do this. And he said, You said it 3 times. This is your fourth. And I walked with him and cried. And I realized there came a moment when I was birthing my 3 children,
Right.
after or in between, in the middle,
In the middle.
active labor was coming to an end and active pushing was about to begin. And there's a moment in the middle there where you know that something's about to change forever.
Ooh.
And I'm not sure I got this.
And it's going to be complex and very difficult.
Whatever comes next changes everything forever.
Wow. And you said, I can't do this.
I can't do this. I can't do this. And I had come up against a really difficult situation just under a year ago at this point.
Uh huh.
But what I would want you to know in this moment, Josh, is that that gave evidence to transition. Actually, the labor and delivery term for that moment for mamas that are delivering is called transition.
Wow.
And what it did was God, in his grace, reminded me that that was where we were. And I didn't know how long I would be in labor versus active pushing, but that I was in transition. He gave me
Oh,
that
like
insight in that
a
moment.
word in a sense that helped you.
That's right. And it kept me focused that something is about to change. And it was almost 40 weeks to the day since the moment I got with God and said, What is going on?
So,
40 weeks.
so in other words, in your life, you're getting ready, like birth. It's
That's
birth
right.
time.
That's right. And that's what a new season is, right? Like a new season is giving birth, making way, moving into, it's a shift. But I don't actually think that transition is a runway or an on-ramp or an
This
off-ramp.
this is very important. Speak to those two things. What it isn't.
So I think we often want the runway because we want to take off, or we've been on this long walk in the same direction and we're so ready for the off ramp that takes us in a new direction. But I actually think the pace of transition is much slower than we would choose for it to be.
I'm going to
And
agree.
so, right. And so, like, because we just want to know what's coming. Our anticipation, at its best, it is glorious anticipation for what God is up to. At
Yes.
its worst, it's frustration, impatience, um, indecision. It's all kind of things where we want to run away from what was and run into something
So we
that's
want to
different.
close the book and say,
That's right.
shelve it, let it gather
Yeah.
dust. I'm out.
Yes.
And that's not healthy.
Yes.
That's not healthy.
No, I would say that transition is more, rather than like vehicular movement where you have speed and momentum,
Sure.
transition is more like building a jigsaw puzzle.
Tell us more.
So I love jigsaw puzzles. Part of it is because it's an intentional way to slow down and focus. There's very little to think about other than what you're looking at with a puzzle. But when you decide to invest in a puzzle, you're picking it from the lid of the box, which
You're
is the
you're looking
pretty,
wow, you're looking at the future in a sense.
yes, Yeah, and you get the whole picture, right? The lid of the box, unless you're button, so you can buy mystery puzzles and that, and then you open it up and all the pieces are white. Like that's a nightmare. That's not a transition. so,
So,
so I'm talking about the cute section of your toy store or your bookshop where they have jigsaw puzzles, and you're looking at all these beautiful images, whether it's photography or art, and you get to choose which image to engage with.
I'm
And
about to
there's a
cry.
reason why you pick one.
Like
Yeah.
I'm
And
actually tearing up because
so you think about Christmas puzzles, those beautiful scenes, and you get to choose like, and they're all
wow.
beautiful pictures. And so you pick the picture that you're like, this is for me. I love this. And I'm happy to stare at this picture for a very long time. I
Uh,
like 1,000 piece, 2,000, 5,000 piece puzzles. I just love the way that plays out.
wow.
And so in transition, when you get the word that we're doing a new thing,
Hmm.
for me, the experience is like the lid of the box where I get to see this picture and I get a glimpse of where we're going and I'm in. And I'm an all in or not in at all kind of
I'm the
gal.
same person.
So, yeah. So you jump in. I've been in my new role as a concrete example. I've been in my new role for 4 weeks. And by last week, I was saying, I think I have about 25 pieces of a 2,000 piece puzzle.
So you're still in. Yeah, it's still pretty early.
Yeah, it's still early. And so, you get this puzzle home, you take the lid off, and you realize, oh, goodness, the pieces are so much smaller than I thought they were going to be. Or they're all the same shape.
Yeah,
Or,
or there's like 288 sky pieces,
yes. And apparently, it was a cloudless day when they took that
yes.
picture for that puzzle.
And where do these fit? That's
Right.
really that's really what you're talking about is where do these fit? The whole thing.
Starting a new puzzle
Yes.
takes the most time. Some people want to start with edges. Some people organize by color. Maybe there's certain objects that they
Hmm.
want to organize by object. So I've done a donut puzzle, so I'm organizing by sprinkle color. And you want to get a handle on it. You want to have a place to begin.
Very interesting. What a great analogy. Keep going.
Yeah. So you will organize a puzzle the way that it makes sense to you.
Right.
But if you're at a table with everybody who wants to start with edges, you're going to finish edges really, you're going to run out of edge pieces a lot faster than middle pieces.
Sure.
And so there are different ways that you need to think about the puzzle. And someone has to sit with the puzzle upside down because not everybody can sit
Yeah.
on the horizontal. And so you have to begin to look at the image, and the lid of the box loses its usefulness over time once you actually know what you're working with. But until you have yourself organized, I find it's the thing I go back to over and over to remind myself why I would ever engage with 2,000 pieces when
Right.
there's 280 sky pieces.
Yes.
And
Because
so
because
organizing,
you're in this space where you're like, number one, I don't see where we're going. I don't see how
right,
all of these fit. And you're
right.
saying, actually, I think I'm ready to quit. I can't
Mhm.
do
I
this, is
can't
the
do
words
this.
that you used.
That's right. And then, if you do jigsaw puzzles if you're a serial puzzler, like we were at the beginning of COVID, we would do one, pack it up, and start another. Well, what happens if, some of the pieces fell off the table when you packed it up again, or when you picked them up, but now you've started a new puzzle
Yes.
and you just assume they're part of the new puzzle. So now you're taking pieces from that old puzzle and trying to fit them in and realizing, I don't think these belong to this puzzle. Or do they?
Or
And so
do they?
that, yeah, or do they? Who would know with 25 out of 2,000? But really, that space in the middle is a decision where maybe some of these pieces will fit moving forward.
Yes.
And so carrying some of them affectionately and saying, this was my favorite piece of that puzzle. I'm going to hang on to them. I'm going to stick them in my pocket and see if they fit. into this new space, because I am convinced that that long walk in the same direction, that nothing is wasted. Not everything is good. Not
Yes.
everything was fun. Not everything was easy. But if you're looking for easy, it's not the Jesus-y way.
No, it's not.
And so taking those pieces with you and saying, I just wonder if some of these are going to be useful.
And that, now that is an interesting piece. That is a very interesting piece that I'm wondering. I again, goosebump moment. I'm wondering whether or not this piece is going to be useful. And that piece doesn't feel good in that previous season. It was a hurtful thing. Where might this piece be useful? Woof. And I'm being very
Yes.
transparent when I say there have been harder transitions for me or harder experiences in a previous experience. I was like mentally done closing the book. I'm out. And there's something that
Mm-hmm.
could be useful. And I get that. And God can bring those things back into our lives. But very, very, very interesting, Christy. I'm very,
Well, and
I'm
even
inspired. I'm inspired, actually. Thank
if
you.
you think about like your bag is sitting on like at the beside your chair and a piece falls off and into your bag. I even find that in this new season I might take out my laptop and open it up in a space in my new role, and all of a sudden there's a piece there that jumps out, like, how did you get here? How did you end up showing up here? And recognizing that y- you might want it not to come with you, but there is a reason why it's still here, and it might just be part of the process, that in this new season you will be able to process pieces that felt unfinished or
Over there.
uncertain. And
Yes.
yes, yeah,
But
yeah.
so
And
this
there's
is
other pieces that I just wish the dog would eat, like, could the dog, like, could those pieces, let's lose those ones altogether.
yeah. Now, this idea of transition is the middle. It's not an end and it's
Mhm.
not a beginning. And you said also this idea of it's not a, an on ramp where you floor the gas. Talk more about this kind of this situation. I think this is extremely important. There's several viewers actually right now who are commenting. I'm into a puzzle that I thought would have been done by now, still have at
Yeah.
least 2 more years to go. Another one says I'm a visual learner who now finds himself in transition. I love the puzzle analogy. So take us now back to this on ramp, off ramp, because we're people of speed, and we're people of
Mhm.
oh, Americans for sure, maybe Canadians. Tell us more about this idea of the of this on ramp, off ramp, because I don't know that that's even a healthy. I think that's maybe a mistaken analogy. Does that make sense to you?
Sure. Yeah, and I think, even if you look at the pumpkin spice latte craze of the fall, where we just can't wait for Starbucks to start adding that syrup to all of their drinks. And we wish for fall to start in August, right? Like, we just can't wait to get to those flavors. And here in Ontario, where I live, it's very similar to Chicago as far as climate and just seasons, and the leaves are only starting to change now. So it's quite late. We had a very warm September.
Okay.
And so, here we are lamenting that, our Thanksgiving was a couple of weeks ago and we couldn't get those pretty, colorful leaf shots, like all these things that we race ahead in a season for. And when it doesn't meet us where we've wanted it to show up, there's this disappointment. But I was
Right.
out for a walk with my daughter recently, and the leaves didn't look like they were changing. And there was more green than anything else. But there was this, the trail goes through like this covering of huge trees. And all of a sudden, we were walking slow enough that I realized my daughter had leaves all caught in her hair.
Okay.
And I turned and looked at her and I said, "Do I have leaves in my hair?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "Huh." And I stopped and stood still for a moment and realized that fall was happening. I was in it. The
Right.
leaves were falling. The river, there'd been a lot of rain, so the river was really moving at a clip that was carrying a breeze. I could smell fall. I
Yes.
could see actual fall, like the verb on me falling. That dry leaf aroma and that bit of crispness with the sunshine coming through the trees. I realized I was in the middle of fall,
You
and the
were,
whole time
yeah.
I was in it,
Yes.
but I was talking the whole time about how fall hadn't come in time, that
Right.
it wasn't the way I wanted it to be on that Thanksgiving walk. And I realized I was missing it because it wasn't what I thought it would be.
How about that?
And so, yeah. So I I realized in that moment that if I could just stand still in the middle of something,
Hmm.
I would learn more about where I was and worry less about where I hadn't arrived yet.
Good word.
So, transition, and that was happening right when I was starting this
This
new
new job.
position.
Yeah. So the
Mhm.
analogy fits. Am I right?
It totally fits. And I realized there are 1,000 questions I could be asking that would be much better teachers. Then I need to figure out what my job is right now. I need to figure out who these people are, what this culture is, what they long for, what they miss about previous seasons, what they hope for in the next season. And I can't figure that out by rushing us to something that we can't know yet.
Right. And how
And so,
true for our own selves.
yeah,
I mean, you're talking, there's two sides to it, right? Where you're leading other people through a transition, but then there's this self-leadership piece that's
yes.
super, super hard. Now, Christy, I want to transition to our third piece today. And as we were talking about this, I said, hey, what's going to be good for us as listeners, listening to you, Christy? What's going to be good for us? And as you were explaining it, I summed it up with be cool with less movement, and you kind of chuckled a little
Mhm.
bit. So could you talk to us about this concept,
Well, I'm going to give our visual learner one more analogy to
please?
dance around with, and it's probably because I'm a kids pastor, so my analogies might be less sophisticated, maybe a little more crude around the edges for the sake of concrete. But God's providence, God's sovereignty has always appeared like a chessboard in my head. And chess
Sure,
is, I mean, there are, I imagine, speed chess games.
sure.
I've never played a quick game of chess. It's probably because I'm not very good at it. But it usually is a slow, thoughtful, strategic game. There are rules. Different pieces move in very specific ways.
Yes,
And so, in this season of transition, when I wasn't where I thought I would be, when the story wasn't the one I had imagined, that the lid of the box was going to be left with pieces unfulfilled. When I
yes.
sat in that place, I realized that standing firm was my only choice because I didn't know the way.
You didn't know the next move.
I didn't know it. And so when I think, and we are very capable people,
Yes.
like just culturally we strive for capacity and capabilities. What if the next move isn't yours?
See,
Just because it's your turn.
yes, that's very interesting. We are very capable people.
Yep.
That is part of my problem.
Hmm. Yeah. So I had a dream one night. I'm not going to burst into Joseph's songs, but I had a dream, and I realized the cost of making a move on my terms,
Hmm.
which was I had this vision of like the long walk in the same direction, and I realized that the path is sometimes as narrow as 1 foot in front of the other, and so you can't run along that. And I remember asking Jesus, can I just rest on the shoulder? My legs are tired. And he said, what shoulder?
There is
And
none.
And it was a ditch that I couldn't see because reeds had grown up, so it looked
Sure.
like grass, but there was a deep fall there. And I couldn't move forward because there was this mountain. And I said, I can climb it. I promise I can climb it. And he said, I didn't ask you to climb it.
Hmm.
And a little later, it was a series of dreams I had. And in the last one, God scooped his hand under the mountain and went,
And blew it
and
out.
it was gone. Now, it would be months until it felt like that. But that hope that God is who he
Hmm.
says he is,
Right.
and he moves the mountains, not me, was enough to keep me standing firm. And I have to tell you, the muscle it takes to stand firm is more exhausting in my experience than the muscles to run.
Or the muscles that it takes to climb some mountain that you weren't supposed to climb.
Movement is good for your muscles, right? It feels
Right.
good. That flexing and standing firm is a hard muscle to use over and over. And so, what I realized with this providential chessboard is that I can't move because God will move others to make way for me.
How about
He will
that?
move mountains, He will move objects, He will also move people. And I've watched that play out where when others move according to obedience and the call on their lives, there is space for others like me to move into different positions. Those spaces, those squares were not open
Not
months.
it wasn't time. It wasn't
Right.
ready.
And I think if we go quickly, it's like knocking the edge of the coffee table with your knee and all the pieces fall over. That's what quick movement and a chess game looks like in my house.
And so being cool with less movement, being okay to not be the prime mover because I am not.
Right.
Allowing this transition to kind of take place when you're transitioning out and you're transitioning in, being
Yes.
accept the idea of the middle, accept the idea that this is a you're in this is the middle is still a part of the story. That's another thing that you're educating me on today. The middle is this is still a part of the story. You are not
Yes.
you're not on hold. The story hasn't
That's
stopped.
right. Right.
You don't need, yeah,
You're actively flexing faith muscles
to stand
in that
still.
space. That's right. It is active participation in the story that God is writing. Because if the part He has written for you to play in this moment is to stand firm,
Right.
then that is actively participating in His will. A dear friend of ours, Michaela White, taught me a prayer years ago. And I don't know that she knows that she taught me to pray it, but I just heard her pray it enough times that I realized the beauty of it.
Yes.
And it's as simple as, what would you have me to do with
Hmm.
all that you have deposited in me to steward? When you don't know the way, when you're not sure why you don't feel movement, when there's a lack of momentum, when you don't know that you're in the middle, the question I sit with the Lord is, what would you have me to do right now with what you've given me?
With these obscure puzzle pieces that are
That's right.
extraordinarily confusing to me.
And don't even connect to each other. Like these first 25 pieces in a 2000 piece puzzle, I found myself in week 1 trying to fit them together.
Yes,
There is no guarantee that 25 out of 2000 even belong on the same side of the picture.
that's right. But but
So
but we're
that
in a trust mode to
that's right.
continue to gather pieces and continue. Man, this is
Yeah.
good. And I think for me being cool with less movement, I am a movement oriented fellow, just so we're clear. I like to move.
Yes, you are.
And I don't I need to be I actually feel like something's wrong if there's no
Mhm.
movement. And that's not necessarily a good space. Hey, listen, bottom line, guess what? It's worth it. It's worth living in that middle space and savoring it, right? Savoring the middle space.
Yes.
There's something good about that. Christy,
I was
thank you.
asked a
Yes, keep going.
question. I just to with this it's worth it piece. a beautiful, loving brother or sister in Christ. I don't remember who said it to me, but when I was in that space of lament and longing and uncertainty, someone said to me, do you think it was God's will? Maybe this vision you had wasn't God's will, because I was in the in between. I was in transition.
And somebody
They,
probably asked that because they were observing how uncomfortable your life was. And God
right.
forbid that uncomfort is his will.
I mean, don't read the Bible if you don't want to see uncomfortable moments.
Right?
But I realized their effort was to be kind and say, God has a plan and you'll get moving again and things will. And I realized it's not up to us whether it's God's will. And just because it's uncomfortable, just because it isn't the way we want it to be, just because it doesn't feel good, doesn't mean he's not good and that goodness isn't chasing me down in the midst of the middle. Right in the middle, there is goodness to be found. And just because it's not a fairy tale doesn't mean it's not his will. In fact, I would argue if it is a fairy tale,
It's
it's probably our will.
you took
It
the
is
words
in
out.
him.
That is so
Yeah.
good. And
Yeah.
so we have actually several pieces. One, we have scriptural history, which leads us to believe this is not a fairy tale. It is hard. We can
It's
bank on
hard.
that. And so if we're a part of this great cloud of witnesses, if we're a part of this big story, shouldn't we expect it to go that same way? Now, we have scriptural history, but we also have our very own history to bank on the idea, no, wait, I've been here before. God, in your case, you were talking about giving birth. God gave me this transition period. I said I couldn't. He showed me that I could, and something beautiful came out of that. Christy,
That's exactly right.
always a joy to talk to you. You're a woman of great depth. Very grateful. Thank you so much for the time that you've shared with us today. I think that there are a lot of people out there who really are in a state of transition, and they're in a state of, and we need to accept the idea that this is the middle. Christy, thank you so much for being with us today.
I'm so glad to have spent the morning with you, Josh. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, gang, thank you guys so much. We are grateful that you're here. This has been the Lead Volunteers Podcast, Lead Ministry Live. We're grateful. Hey, leave us a comment, leave us a like, leave us something. But more than anything, may you be left with something that's inspirational to your heart. God bless you guys.